Hello everyone, today we'll talk about descending or motor tracts. These are the objectives of this lecture: introduction, pyramidal tracts and extrapyramidal tracts. So first of all, we should know that there are two types of neurons: upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. Upper motor neuron is a group of neurons which is originated from higher level, that means from the cortex or subcortex, and connected to lower motor neuron. Why? To modify its activity. So what is lower motor neuron? It is a group of neurons which is originated from the CNS, that means from the brain or spinal cord, and connected to neuromuscular junction at the muscle. So the upper motor neuron which is originated from the cortex are corticospinal tract, which is originated from the cortex and terminated in the spinal cord; corticonuclear tract, which is originated from the cortex and terminated in the nuclei of the cranial nerve at the brainstem. Both are called pyramidal system. Okay, and the tracts which are originated from the subcortex level, that means any place except the cerebral cortex, are tectospinal, rubrospinal, reticulospinal, vestibulospinal and olivospinal tract, and all they are called extrapyramidal system. So these are the names of ascending tracts and these are the names of descending tracts. So first of all, we should know that motor activity is controlled by interactions of three major regions of the brain: the cerebral cortex, the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. The cerebral cortex is responsible for planning and execution of the complex voluntary motor activity. The basal ganglia is responsible for initiation of the movement, and the cerebellum receives the information from the whole nervous system to plan, modify and coordinate the movement. So the pyramidal tract is formed of primary motor cortex and secondary motor cortex. Primary motor cortex is responsible for execution of the voluntary motor activity, while secondary is responsible for programming and planning of complex motor activity, which is then relayed to the primary motor cortex, where the execution of motor activity is initiated. That means the planning and the programming of the complex motor activity done in the secondary motor cortex. Then it will go to the primary motor cortex to be initiated. So what are the area of the brain that contribute to secondary motor cortex? They are supplementary motor area, which is responsible for coordination of movement occurring on the two sides of the body; premotor cortex, motor control of the axial and proximal limb; and frontal eye field, responsible for coordination of eye movement; and posterior parietal motor area. And these are the area we have here: primary motor cortex, this is the supplementary motor area, this is the premotor cortex, and this is the frontal eye field, and this is the posterior parietal motor area. So we have two types of corticospinal tract: lateral and anterior. Lateral, responsible for movement of distal muscles of upper and lower limb. That means any intrinsic and extrinsic muscle of hand and foot, especially muscle of hand, is responsible of the lateral corticospinal tract. And the anterior is responsible for movement of axial muscles, which are neck, shoulder and the trunk, and the proximal upper limb muscle. So this is the pathway of the corticospinal tract. This fiber originated from the cortex, from primary and secondary motor cortex, and then it will run through the corona radiata, after that through the posterior limb of the internal capsule, then to the midbrain. It will run at a cross cerebri structure in the midbrain, after that runs through bones to the medulla. At the level of the low medulla, approximately about 85 to 90% of axons of the corticospinal tract decussate in the middle, forming pyramidal decussation. As we can see here, after decussation they form what's called pyramidal decussation. So these axons then descend in the lateral column. The decussated fiber will descend in the spinal cord in the lateral column, so they are called lateral corticospinal tract. Then it will terminate at the cervical, lumbar and sacral spinal cord level. So the remaining 10 to 15% of the corticospinal tract which do not decussate will descend ipsilaterally in the anterior column as anterior corticospinal tract. As we can see here, this fiber which does not decussate to the opposite side, it will run in the anterior column of the spinal cord, and it will be called anterior corticospinal tract. and finally it will be terminated at cervical and upper thoracic spinal cord level. So here I will talk about the lateral corticospinal and anterior corticospinal. Most of the lateral corticospinal tract fiber end exactly in the lateral intermediate zone gray matter. This is a zone in the gray matter of the spinal cord. This zone contains both excitatory and inhibitory interneuron, as well as it will terminate at the anterior horn of the spinal cord, which contain both excitatory and inhibitory interneuron and also lower motor neuron, where they form this fiber from the lateral corticospinal tract form excitatory synapses with those interneuron and lower motor neuron. So if it excites the excitatory interneuron, this will lead to stimulation of the lower motor neuron and cause muscle contraction. But if it excites inhibitory interneuron, this will lead to inhibition of the lower motor neuron and cause muscle relaxation. For anterior corticospinal tract, before the termination at the spinal cord, these fibers will decassate to the opposite side. So finally it will decassate, but not at the medulla level. It will decassate before termination at the spinal cord. They will decassate to the opposite side of the spinal cord to make a synapses with either interneuron or lower motor neuron itself. So the corticonuclear tract, it is a tract consisting of fibers of upper motor neuron and accompanies the corticospinal tract. The function of this tract is to affect the function of cranial nerve nuclei, which nuclei from 3rd to 12th cranial nerve nuclei. The first tract in extrapyramidal system is called tectospinal tract, and it is responsible for movement of cervical and thoracic region of the trunk in response to visual stimuli, and this is a reflex called visuospinal reflex. To explain it more, for example, when you walk and see a car coming to crash you, automatically you will run away. So the visual stimuli in this situation is seeing a car coming to crash you, and the response is running away. And here we have the pathway of the tectospinal tract. It is a subcortical tract, that means originating from the subcortex. Here the tectospinal tract is originating from the midbrain, exactly from the superior colliculus in the midbrain. After that it decassates to the opposite side and descend in the spinal cord until terminate at the anterior horn. The second tract is called Rubrospinal tract, and it is responsible for stimulation of flexion and inhibition of extension. The third one is called Reticulospinal tract, and it is responsible for control of movement of axial and proximal limb muscle, and also for posture maintenance. We have two types of this tract, pontine and medullary. Pontine is responsible for stimulation of extension and inhibition of flexion, while medullary is responsible for stimulation of flexion and inhibition of extension. And here we have the pathway of rubrospinal and reticulospinal. Rubrospinal is originating from the red nucleus in the midbrain and then decassate to the opposite side, then descend in the spinal cord until terminates at the anterior horn, while medial reticulospinal is originating from the pontine reticular nuclei, and lateral reticulospinal is originating from medullary reticular nuclei and then descend together in the spinal cord until terminate at the anterior horn. The last tract is vestibulospinal tract, and we have two types of this tract, lateral and medial. Lateral is responsible for stimulation of extension and inhibition of flexion, and also for maintenance of posture, while medial is responsible for head movement adjustment. And here we have the pathway. Both lateral and medial are originating from the vestibular nuclei in the brain stem and then descend both in the spinal cord until terminate at the anterior horn. So finally, to remember the function of those tracts, here we have VIP makes you stand up. What does that mean? That means if you want to stand up, you need to contract your extensor muscle, So you need V and P. What does V stand for? It stands for Vestibulospinal tract, and P for pontine reticulospinal tract. So those tracts are responsible for stimulation of extension. The second sentence is sit down on rubber mat. What does that mean? That means when you want to sit down, you need to contract your flexor muscle. And to do this, you should have R and M. R stands for Rubrospinal tract and M stands for medullary reticulospinal tract. So rubro and medullary reticulospinal tract are both responsible for stimulation of flexion. This is the end of this lecture. Thank you.